All right, well, good morning. It's 9 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who are new, I'm Gene Ransom. I've kind of the facilitator, chair, whatever, of this committee. So I usually kick us off and then other people do all the real work. But just to start on a couple notes of interest for the good of the order, I don't know if Will wants to talk about either of these more. Maybe Brian will mention the second one that I'm going to bring up. But first and foremost, the CMMI released AHEAD, a NOFO for AHEAD, which is a Notice of Funding Opportunity. You got to love the federal government. They give everything cool in acronyms. And I think NOFO is one of the better ones. I can think of a lot better words for what NOFO could stand for. But anyway, that's a Notice of Funding Opportunity. And AHEAD is the program that it looks like we're being signaled by the federal government to apply to continue our total cost of care agreement. So I'm just calling that to everyone's attention and letting them know it's out there so they can look at it. And obviously the state is probably evaluating and figuring out what to do. The reason it's important for us is the whole reason we're able to do EQIP, the Episode Quality Improvement Program, another cool acronym, is because we have the ability under the total cost of care agreement to use the authority and the waivers that are there to use this value-based care, do this value-based care program. So it's important to pay attention. And I can assure you MedChi and the HSCRC and CRISP and everybody have been communicating to both CMMI and the state about the importance of whatever we apply for keeping EQIP. So there'll be a lot more work and talking on that, but I'm just calling it to your attention so you can look at it and see what you think. And obviously, I'm sure the state will come out with more information once they make a decision on how they're going to go forward. Just for everybody's recollection, the current total cost of care agreement is till January 1 of 26. So we have some time to negotiate through the process with CMMI and work through it as we go forward. So that was the first thing I thought I'd share for the good of the order. The second thing is that MedChi has been working with the AMA and other organizations to try to get the AAPM bonus funded. And I got to thank Senator Cardin's office and Senator Cardin himself, particularly, who's been quite an advocate for us on this. It is my understanding that the last finance compromise had 1.75 as the AAPM. Nothing is finalized yet. There's different language on the energy side, on the House side. I don't know if Brian has more information or not. I do know that Senator Cardin and others on the Finance Committee are pushing for the 5 points that we originally got. I don't think, given the CBO score, and another acronym, that's the budget group that scores things, that gives you a dollar amount for the cost, did us any favors. They made the AAPM dollar amount very high, which is making it very, very challenging to get anything. Having said that, no matter what we get, it's a positive because it gives you choices. And you're going to learn more from Brian today and from Premier about, or that is correct, right? Anyway, I hope that's the right name of your group. Anyway, about MIPS and AAPM, and you'll see that even if the AAPM is set, if there's no change and we stay with what's in the statute, the 0.75, it still might be a really good deal to be in this when you do MIPS, and he'll explain all that to you and why that is later on today. So this is a really important meeting to be on. But before we get to that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jessica from CRISP, who's going to start with some updates and some other stuff, and we'll go from there. So Jessica, it is all yours.
Yeah. Actually, we're going to put Brian at the top of the top of the agenda today. But as Jean mentioned, so we'll spend the first 30 or so minutes with Brian and some other colleagues from Premier talking a little bit about AAPM, the relationship with MIPS. I think there's been a fair amount of sort of questions that we've gotten through our inbox. So I thought it would be great to just sort of have some background and baseline information for you all. And then we will close out the meeting sort of with some updates about what's going on for PY3, including timelines, contracts, what to expect throughout the end of this calendar year. And then we'll talk a lot about what are we thinking, what's things that may be impacting when we look at PY4, which is calendar year 2025. And while that seems very far off, there are some decisions that probably need to be made early next year. So yeah. We'll do that. So Brian, I will hand it over to you to start us off.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just by way of introductions, I'm Brian Smith. I am joined today by a couple of colleagues. Seth Edwards is with me. Seth is a former lobbyist in the Washington, D.C. area, and now leads our Premier's strategic collaboratives and is based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We also have two folks with us that you may recognize from the community. Sandy Michaels, who lives over in Cumberland and is a former hospital CFO for your region, has been deeply involved in this work, and Joshua Hollander in Silver Springs, who's a pillar of the community, will also have played a major role in putting this together, and I want to thank them for doing that. For those of you that aren't familiar with Premier, Premier is best known as being a large group purchasing organization for healthcare providers. We serve the majority of hospitals in the nation one way or another, and a great deal of the physicians in helping them procure the supplies that they need, as well as providing the IT and infrastructure to help run their businesses. Seth, Sandy, Josh, and myself all reside in the Strategic Collaboratives Division, where we have a very tight focus on population health and help a number of organizations, including a number in Maryland, with their ACO programs, with their bundled payments, and other type of value-based care. So on the next slide, the conversation we're going to have today is talking a little bit about the Quality Payment Program, or QPP, and the options that you have going forward. As MD-PCP Track 1 begins to sunset and force providers into making decisions about taking higher levels of risk or looking at other programs to evaluate, Maryland is actually in a fairly similar position as much of the rest of the nation, where ACOs have had protection from two-sided risk for the past 3 years during COVID, and are now having to reevaluate their strategy and how they want to address MIPS now that they have to take that higher level of risk. So the timing and issues you're facing are very similar to those that we're seeing elsewhere in the nation. And Seth and Sandy and Josh and I have probably close to 100 organizations at this point think through these decisions. The first step in thinking it through, obviously, is coming up with a strategy. So today's presentation is meant to be a refresher on the QPP program, on MIPS, on alternative payment models, and what it means to be taking risk in any of those. I know Seth Edwards. He will absolutely talk about the AAPM bonus. It is something he is passionate about at this point and has some strong feelings on, so we will touch on all of that as well. So again, today's conversation is meant to be at the higher strategic level. Happy to also take questions, more detailed questions. We have also provided our email address at the end of the presentation. And if folks have specific questions they would like to ask afterwards, please do feel to reach out. On the next slide, just a quick reminder of why we're even having this conversation. As a nation, we are at a tipping point. The Medicare Part A program, which is the lockbox and trust fund for paying for inpatient care, is set to go bankrupt. As more and more Americans move out of the workforce and stop paying the payroll taxes that fund Part A, and instead begin taking payments from that and using those expenditures, that program is expected to bankrupt. As a result of that, Congress and CMS and CMMI are pushing as quickly as they can to move 100% of Medicare beneficiaries and a large number of Medicaid beneficiaries into alternative programs, such as Medicare Advantage or ACOs. The goal is to have 100% moved over by 2030. And therefore, they are continuing to experiment with a number of these different types of models. A key component of that is the QPP. This is one of the most efficient programs we've seen at helping force organizations to move into value-based care. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth Edwards to talk a little bit more about the specifics of it and what we see as the strategic considerations. Seth?
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Happy Friday. A healthy dose of healthcare policy on a Friday morning is a great way to go into the weekend. As Brian mentioned, I am a lobbyist in recovery, and I say that because I was a lobbyist when the quality payment program was developed under MACRA, the Medicare and CHIP Reauthorization Act, and it essentially created three different models or three different areas that clinicians started with physicians, but has expanded much more broadly. We'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. Was created to move them into a much greater focus around value. I used to dread this time of year, particularly going into the December holidays, because as you all recall, the MACRA and the quality payment program replaced the SGR, the sustainable growth rate, and it became this annual exercise of ensuring that we did not enact the SGR cuts and try to find pay-fors. And it's funny, someone mentioned the advanced AAPM bonus. It is in essence become the new SGR as we look for ways to pay for extending it at the end of each year. So I feel bad for my colleagues in DC having to work through the funding mechanisms to make that a possibility. So diving into the quality payment program. So there are essentially three options that we're going to walk through here today. So there's what's called the merit-based incentive payment system, or MIPS, as well as the MIPS value pathway, or MVP. So you talk about acronyms, there's an acronym within an acronym. There is the MIPS APM track, and then APM stands for alternative payment model. And then there's advanced alternative payment model. And so each has different incentives and different dynamics. Someone's dog does not like MIPS. I can say. So what we're going to try to do is walk through these at a high level as well. I mentioned those are once you get to one layer, there are another 15 to 20 layers underneath of it in terms of complexity. And so as we go through this, if you do have questions, please ask us. If you have questions after the presentation, don't hesitate to reach out. So let's dive in and start with MIPS. So MIPS is as I mentioned, the merit-based incentive payment system, and it essentially is what will drive adjustments to your Part B fee-for-service reimbursement. As a part of that, you're going to be required to report 4 different categories: quality, promoting interoperability, which is formerly known as meaningful use. It's kind of like the Prince of healthcare policy, improvement activities, and then cost. And so each of these areas are kind of the focal points. You have the ability to choose different types of measures or activities to report. And then in the end, you'll get a score and have your payments adjusted based off of that. I'll go into a little more detail on that here momentarily. So the first question you're probably asking yourself is, well, do I have to do this? Am I required? So there are some exclusions from reporting requirements. Well, the first is, are you newly enrolled in Medicare? So did you enroll during the performance year, during the actual year that you're being judged? And if so, you are eligible to you don't necessarily have to report. There's also what they call a low volume threshold exclusion. So if you have less than $90,000 in charges, if you provide care for fewer than 200 beneficiaries, or if you provide fewer than 200 services, you're also excluded from the reporting requirement. In terms of the types of clinicians, as I mentioned, the program started with just physicians being required to report, but as it's been further implemented, that list has grown pretty tremendously. So you can see in this middle category all of the different eligible clinician types that are required to report: physicians, osteopathic practitioners, chiropractors, PAs, NPs, certified nurse, midwives, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, very broad group. And then for the timeline, what's important to know is that your activities in a year, so using this year as an example, as a performance year 23, you would submit your data during 24 and you would have your payment adjustment in 25. So there's a delay to it, delay gratification, or the opposite of that again, but it puts in place a really important impetus to understand what you're doing now and how it's going to impact your reimbursement down the road. So diving into this a little bit more detail. So up at the top, you can see that this model has been implemented over time. It's been sort of phased in. So when it first started, the amount of reimbursement you had at risk was plus or minus 4% on your fee-for-service Part B payments. Beginning in 2022, that amount has increased to 9% of your Part B payment. So you can see it's a pretty large chunk, and that can be an upward adjustment or a downward adjustment. What's really important to note about MIPS is that it's technical, that is, it's budget neutral. Okay, so what that means is that there's no new dollars for this program. Instead, in order to get a positive adjustment, you have someone else is going to get a negative adjustment. So it creates this dynamic where there are winners and losers. And so that's why, again, understanding this is going to be really important. The areas that we talked about in terms of the categories, excuse me, for quality is really quality related measures. So there's a large number of measures that are out there that are available to be selected from. And it really depends on your reporting approach that will avail you to certain measures. And we're not going to go to that level of detail today, but if you do have questions about it, we're happy to help. The second tier is cost. So this is really kind of like a proxy for population health or managing a population. So the measures here are Medicare spending per beneficiary, total cost per capita, or if you're a specialist, episodic based cost measures. So kind of replicating the idea of a bundle without paying you as if you're in a bundle. So this is a big area of focus. The third area is improvement activity. So again, kind of tying it back to the idea of value-based care and population health. Improvement activities are things like expanded access, population management, care coordination, engaging with beneficiaries, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, trying to push organizations into value-based models. And then lastly, promoting interoperability. So again, this is a new term for meaningful use. I think they decided that enough people didn't like meaningful use that they needed to change the name. So they've gone with promoting interoperability, but it's very much the idea of leveraging certified electronic health record technology to within your care delivery. So you can see down the bottom, there are two ways that you can engage, or that your scores in these categories are weighted. They're very similar. Traditional MIPS and MIPS value pathways. It really just denotes different types of measure sets that are available to you as clinicians. You can see here quality is weighted at 30% of your overall composite score. Cost is weighted at 30% of your overall composite score. Those improvement activities are worth 15%, and then promoting interoperability is worth 25%. And really at the crux of this, it is a carrot and stick approach to move providers into value. Right. So if you're doing well on these, you're largely acting as an ACO or as a group that's managing a population, and they want to give you a benefit for that. So the potential for an upward adjustment. If you're not doing these, if you're kind of operating in kind of the historical way in a volume driven world, then you're going to likely have a reduction to your payments. And if you don't report it at all, you automatically receive a negative 9% adjustment to your Part B reimbursement. So we went through this at a pretty high level. I'm not going to belabor a lot of this other than to say for quality and for cost, it is a 12-month reporting period. Quality, there's a large number of measures, as I mentioned, 198 quality measures available. You will have to select 6 depending upon the way that you're reporting. For cost, it is also, as I mentioned, a 12-month reporting period. There are a number of measures that are tied to claims, so you won't actually have to submit anything to CMS. They have that data already. And in 23, there are 25 different cost measures available. For improvement activities, there are 106 currently, although they added a few in the recently released final physician fee schedule rule that will give you a few more options. Essentially, you'll have to get to 4 points or activities to meet the full requirements for the improvement activity score. And to gain those points and to claim that you're doing that activity, you have to do it for at least 90 days during a calendar year, continuous days. And then lastly is interoperability or promoting interoperability, again, that formerly known as meaningful use. It requires utilizing 2015 edition of CERT. It has a number of different areas or categories that you have to report, and you have to have 90 days continuous reporting within the calendar year as well. So what does this mean? As I mentioned, the maximum downward and upward adjustment is 9%, but because it's budget neutral, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you do this and you get 100% score, you're going to get a 9% positive adjustment. It also doesn't mean that if you do poorly that you're automatically going to get a negative 9% adjustment. So CMS, as a part of rulemaking, goes through an annual projection process where they've looked at the estimated 719,000 physicians and qualified health professionals that are eligible for MIPS, and did a projection where they believe that the average positive payment adjustment will be about 3.71%. The average penalty will be about 1.8% negative. The maximum bonus is right around 6%, and the maximum penalty obviously is negative 9%. What this doesn't incorporate is something called the exceptional performer bonus, which gives you a little bit of extra points on top if you're in the top 10% of all clinicians reporting. And so we've actually seen some organizations that we work with that are a part of a Medicare ACO achieve 7 and 8% updates to their payments in this last performance year. So there's a little bit higher, but again, the average is right around 3, and the negative is right around a negative 1%.
Seth, just staying on that for 1 minute, and correct me if you believe differently, but most of the results we've seen and the projections we've seen is that it's the small practices, the 1 and 2 provider practices, that are going to pay the bulk of the penalties. Mid-sized groups do okay, may take penalties, may be budget neutral. And then it's frankly, the health systems and very large physician groups that provide the infrastructure to be able to get some of the bonus dollars. Is that still what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Brian. You're spot on. I mean, a lot of it is related to resources and capital to invest in setting up the infrastructure to do the reporting. And unfortunately, many small practices don't really have that ability. So it certainly falls on their shoulders. There's no question about that. And again, that's why some of the options that, Brian, you're going to talk about here momentarily are attractive.
There's a question in the chat, Seth. Could we get a little more information on the side note that HIPSAs get 2 times points for each activity? Is that doubling score and or percentage change to reimbursement?
That is doubling the points for each activity within the improvement activities category. So for groups that are in a health professional shortage area, there's less of a burden on doing the additional activities that are there. Instead, you're able to get double the points for the activities that you're putting in place. So it doesn't necessarily drive the underlying reimbursement per se. It just reduces the burden on reporting or implementing these improvement activities within the category. I hope that answered the question. Okay. All right, wonderful. So as we mentioned, there are other options than MIPS. So MIPS has the opportunity for a plus or minus 9% adjustment. In the advanced APM model, this is where certain models qualify for an exemption from MIPS and give you an opportunity for a guaranteed lump sum adjustment. And I think you all are probably relatively familiar with this, given the state's activities and your ability to have historically been qualified practitioners, which is the term. And then the last category is the MIPS APM, and that's one that we're going to spend a little bit of time on. I'll try to speed up, Brian, to give you enough time to cover it. So for the advanced APM bonus. So really the idea here was to create a carrot and stick approach, as I mentioned, to move providers into value-based models and into accountable relationships. MIPS was kind of the stick, right? If you don't do this, if you don't have improvement activities, if you're not focused on costs and managing the population, we're going to give you a negative payment adjustment. The advanced APM side is kind of like a carrot. It's saying, if you move into a risk-based model, we're going to give you more certainty around the dollars that you can receive from the federal government for it. And so under MIPS, they created this under the quality payment program, there is the advanced APM track. As was noted earlier, the advanced APM bonus is something that is currently in a state where it has to be annually paid for, unfortunately. We're hopeful that the Senate Finance Committee will actually be able to get their 1.75%, I think is where it's at for 2 years, which would be great. As you mentioned, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has a bill out that is a little more complicated. It has tiers based on how long you receive the advanced APM bonus. The longer you've had it, the less you get. And once you've had it for 5 years, you no longer get it anymore. You revert back to essentially a 0.75% update going forward. So we're hopeful they'll find a middle ground. Frankly, I'm hopeful they'll create flexibility for qualified practitioners in advanced APMs, that if they do qualify or if they decide that they want to report MIPS, they have that option. That's not unfortunately on the table yet, but I do think it would help better align the incentives. So essentially, to be in an advanced APM, you have to be in a model that qualifies. You have to take on certain amounts of risk and meet certain other qualifying requirements in terms of thresholds. So essentially, you have to bear more than nominal risk for financial losses. And what they mean by that is you actually have to have the potential to write CMS or the payer a check back if you have losses or if you spend more than is expected of you. You also have certain thresholds that you have to pass in terms of patients or revenue going through the APM, so that you're not just kind of skirting along the edges and trying to qualify, but you actually have a meaningful participation within the program. And so there are a number of different models out there that are qualifying. Medicare ACO is qualified. For you all specifically, there are a number of different programs, as you see here, that have qualified as an advanced APM historically as well. So again, another consideration if you are interested in continuing that moving forward, depending on how the state realignment with the head goes, there is a potential also for other programs that will meet the requirements for advanced APM. But with that said, that requires taking on risk. And what we have often found is that for many groups, there is a middle ground that provides a great path forward. And that's what we call the MIPS APM track. And Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk through that.
Great. Thanks, Seth. As Seth mentioned, we did sort of find this middle ground. When the original legislation was released, and even today, if you look at much of what's out there, folks talk about the QPP program as being two tracks. One being staying in the traditional MIPS or MIPS MVP program, and the other going to the advanced alternative payment model and taking that two-sided risk. When we started doing assessments of this program, when it was first introduced, I think we did about 60 assessments in a 7-month per period. We found that this middle path, the path where you take no downside risk, but do enter into an ACO, you do receive the lower updates to reimbursement, the 0.25 versus the 0.75 that's in the advanced alternative payment model, but receives preferential treatment under the MIPS program. We found this was the most compelling to the organizations we work with. And in fact, going forward, given the uncertainty around the AAPM bonus, and if that will continue to be funded, given some of the uncertainty around what COVID has done to populations and some great hesitation around taking two-sided risk right now, we think this is going to continue to be the vehicle that really drives organizations into value-based care, especially as Seth pointed out, now that the MIPS program, the QPP program, is being fully implemented and at the full penalty and bonuses. That cost component is just so arduous that we think it will continue to drive organizations this way. Why the MIPS APM is so important is because of the preferential treatment you receive under traditional MIPS. So under traditional MIPS, 25% of your score is based on interoperability, 30% is based on quality, 15% is based on improvement, and then 30% is based on cost. With that cost component, as Seth said, being the one that has caused the most heartburn for providers over the years and has been rolled in slowly by CMS to avoid overly disrupting the market. If you are in an ACO, the scoring is a bit different. Your interoperability score is based on the ACO in aggregate. There is still some reporting that you need to do, but the score is based on the entire ACOs. The quality component now becomes 50% of your entire score and is calculated using the ACO quality scores. There is a subset of the quality measures that ACOs report on that CMS will pick up and apply to the participants in the ACO. Typically, most years, ACOs do pretty well on these measures. 2022 was a little bit odd due to some changes in the program, but generally we see ACOs do very, very well there. The improvement measures, you receive an automatic 100% score. CMS assumes that because you are in an ACO, you are doing that work already and grants you full points. And then the cost component, the one that is so detrimental under traditional MIPS, that's actually removed altogether if you have a MIPS APM. Because you are already focused on managing the cost of the population, CMS sees that as being redundant and instead takes those points and reallocates them to the other three categories. As a result of that, we frequently see ACOs and participants in ACOs receiving very high scoring in the MIPS program and performing some of the best in the nation. As we said earlier, this is actually a pretty efficient law. It's taken a while to be implemented fully and to brought to a full force, but we think it's actually fairly efficient in moving the market towards value-based care. It's just not necessarily the two-sided risk portion, but instead this more generous portion.
So Brian, and that would obviously be the same for EQIP. If you were an EQIP, they would drop out the cost and you would get the automatic 100 for improvement. And I guess they would use the quality scores that we're using for the quality for EQIP instead of the quality for the ACO. Is that what they would do?
I believe so. That's my understanding.
That's mine as well. So, I mean, I think it's really important for people to understand this. It might, even if they put in the full bonus, in some cases, the practice really needs to do an assessment to determine whether the bonus is a better deal than the MIPS APM track.
Absolutely. Seth mentioned some of the additional points that have been eligible up until now. We have members, folks with ACOs, not EQIP, that are getting 7 and 8% bonuses today. Or will get them next year. Compare that to the 5% AAPM, and you can certainly do even better under this program. No, there's a question that came up. That is one of the downsides to the strategy. Being a MIPS APM, you still do receive the 0.25 update to the reimbursement versus the 0.75. Typically, that is offset by the higher performance in the MIPS reporting. But again, you probably want to sit down and do the math and be sure that it pencils out for you as well. All right. On the next slide, talk for just a minute about the timing. The timing on this is still a little loose simply because CMS has not yet released additional information. First of all, as we've acknowledged already, we still don't have from Congress a finalized idea of what they're going to do with the AAPM bonus going forward. There are a number of proposals on the table of varying levels of funding for that program, varying timeframes for funding, and perhaps even curtailing the eligibility. Until we get some of the other more immediate decisions made, this is likely something Congress will kick down the road for a little bit longer and leave some uncertainty around. The good news is that if you are contemplating an ACO at least, we do have a fairly broad window and long window for making decisions. Registration is likely to open around the May or June timeframe. It is a quick and easy lift. You should be able to make a registration in about 30 minutes if you're applying to become a new program. And then by July or August is the final opportunity to join someone else's ACO and appear on that participant list. Still time to remove you and take you off of that list later if you decide not to proceed, but the final opportunity to join someone else's. And it's not actually until December that new ACOs have to make a decision to actually enter the program. You can enter a non-binding application early next year and have the entire year to decide if that's something you actually want to do. And decide simply in December to drop out, to not sign the contract, and you'll be just fine. By comparison, on the next slide, it's unfortunately too late to decide for this year about what you're going to do for 2023 for QPP. You are in that performance period. Hopefully by now you've gone ahead and implemented that 90-day promoting interoperability and improvement activity window and are getting that out of the way. At the end of the month, the opportunity to register for MVP ends. As Seth said, the MVP program is different. It's more limited in scope and options that it gives you. However, currently, and this is just currently, you are able to report both under traditional MIPS and MVP, and CMS will take the higher of either approach. So if you are concerned that you may not have done well under the traditional program, take a look at the MVP program, and that's something of interest. December 31st, the window ends for this year, and by April, we need to have submitted all the quality claims. We expect in March to have better information about the timing and window for the coming year. That was a heck of a lot of information we went through very quickly. I'm actually impressed with us. Usually Seth and I are far more long-winded than this. So I do glad we kept it going. With that, we can pause for a minute and take any questions. And I think I see a number in the chat.
Brian, the one that's probably most germane, or the one that I bet most groups are asking is, does the MIPS APM participant get the 0.75% update or the 0.25% that's applied to MIPS? And I think you mentioned it, but I just want to be sure we cover that.
Yeah, absolutely. MIPS APMs get the 0.25. You're not taking the full risk, so not eligible for the 0.75. But again, typically the improved performance on the MIPS program and the improved payments should help cover that.
And maybe you guys could comment a little bit on the competitive advantage that you would have in Maryland. I mean, we have access to a lot more AAPMs than other states, and in a lot of other states, there's a lot less people in value-based care. And obviously, this measure is not just in Maryland. It's not a geographic measure. It's being measured nationwide, correct? Right. So obviously, if you're in a value-based care program and you're doing the MIPS AAPM, you're being measured against someone in Alabama who's on a total volume basis. And that means that there's a higher probability you're going to be successful when you're taking out, you're getting 100% on the quality and you're taking cost out. So that puts you you have a real competitive advantage against colleagues across the country by doing that. So, and then I guess the second point I would make, or maybe would like you to comment on, is the timing to make these decisions. If you're a system or a group, or maybe you're one of the EQIP entities and you want to help the practitioners make a decision on whether they're going to go in to MIPS or whether they're going to go take the advanced payment bonus, what timetable would you suggest that they think about making the decision and running some numbers? And is there a way that they can get some kind of guess as to what kind of bonus in MIPS they might get?
Great questions. I'm going to start by working backwards for a minute. At this point, the ability to predict the MIPS payment is fairly limited. There's still a fair amount of flux in the nation and a number of organizations that are able to apply for some of the waivers, hardship waivers, and participation waivers that are likely lowering the number of losers in the program, those who will pay in to fund the winners. Seen a few folks attempt to do calculations. None of them have been overly precise at this point, unfortunately. And unfortunately, CMS still has not released the results for even 2022 to know what the nation as a whole looks like. Seth and I work with 60 ACOs and probably close to 100 bundled payment organizations. And so we do collect information from health systems about how they are performing in general, and can compile some of that if someone would like to talk, but we are still waiting for CMS to provide more information. Go ahead, Seth.
No, I was going to say, I mean, so we can certainly help with that using the information we've got from those members. You know, there are back of the envelope ways that you could at least get a sense, right? So taking that that generalization that we had, you could model out the extremes. So 9% positive, 9% negative, just recognizing that it's highly unlikely, but at least gives you a scale from which you can operate. And then also looking at the anticipated minimum or average positive and average negative that CMS put out. Again, it's not it's not going to be wholly accurate. It doesn't incorporate, to your point, your state's positioning you for being more successful in these types of programs than in others, but it can at least give you kind of the thumb in the wind of what the expectation is from CMS.
All right, we got a few questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and read them. For a program like EQIP, where practice selects episodes to participate in, is there a minimum number of episodes or volume that must be selected to qualify for a MIPS AAPM? What is it? If you, the minimum number is the minimum number to participate, and if you participate and you're qualified and and you're in, then you're in. And remember, MIPS is done on an individual practitioner level, right? So it would be or AAPM. Each practitioner is going to have to to meet the requirements. They can meet the requirements by being in an EQIP entity, but it's those minimum volume thresholds that get you in the program and have you participating. If you have specific questions about your practitioners or your entity, you can reach out to Jessica or I on that one. Anything else you want to add on that, Brian or Seth?
I think you hit it.
Okay, cool. Next is the MIPS exception bonus that has existed for the past few years is going away in 2022, correct? So are the high MIPS adjustments still expected for some practices going forward? This is not the same as APM bonus.
Yeah, that's right. So the exceptional performance bonus is going away. With that said, it doesn't change the dynamic in that even so, let's say the Senate Finance Committee bill is passed, 1.75% APM bonus for 2 years. That's going to be I'm going to imagine the ceiling going forward, the 1.75. It's very hard to claw money back from Congress once it is taken away. And so when you do the comparison between what's going to position you the best, 1.75% plus a guaranteed 0.75% in the advanced APM world, while you're taking on risk, compared to a potential for positive or negative 9%, even with the average being a positive 3.5%, add on 0.25% to that. The dynamic there that we're seeing is the MIPS track can position you better in terms of the update to your reimbursement compared to the advanced APM track. And I think that's really the calculation that you'd want to put in place. Maybe you're not going to be able to achieve the super high levels of 8% updates, but you're likely going to be above the 1.75%, assuming that's what Congress finalizes going forward. So you're correct, but we still think that there will be more dollars available, excuse me, in the MIPS track.
And the potential for, of course, earning shared savings or other rewards for the underlying program that you're in, which
Correct.
can also be significant.
And Sharon asked about the CHERT requirement for EQIP. I think we're going to cover that a little later. That has to do, particularly we're seeing that as an issue for the PT bundle. And I think Jessica's going to cover that when she talks later on. I had one other question that I had. I believe that next year is the final year where we end up with a -9, +9 swing for the first time. So cost becomes a bigger factor. Do you think that will change any of the calculations for the practices as they're deciding whether to do AAPM, APM, MIPS, or MIPS? What do you think about that? How does that affect it? And how does that affect some of the specialties who potentially costs could be very high? Well, for example, rheumatology might have a lot of costs where that could be a bigger factor, where maybe in others, it's different. So, or what do you think about that, especially by specialty with regards to costs?
You want to go, Brian? Yeah, sure. So in general, the cost category is extremely challenging. Making impacts on Medicare spending per beneficiary or total cost per care in isolation as a practice is very, very challenging. And again, the idea was to create this kind of carrot and stick approach to push clinicians into value-based models, eventually into ACOs. And so when you think about managing costs in that manner, if you're doing it, you're already acting as if you're an ACO. And so Brian's point around considering the MIPS APM track, or if you're proficient in managing a population moving into risk, becomes a little bit more attractive, because if you're doing that, if you're managing Medicare spend per beneficiary, if you're reducing total cost per capita, you're generating savings for CMS. And so you should avail yourself to share in those savings. So that's the first point. The second point is, yes, 30% of your composite score is tied to it. It is challenging to do. It will likely create more winners and losers because of that dynamic. And when you think of it from a specialty lens, there are certain specialty specific measures that are available to you. Those episodic measures that essentially replicate a bundle payment, but don't pay you as if you're a bundle payment. So they'll say, how are you managing? I like to run. I'm an avid runner, and I'm going to have my knees replaced eventually, right? So they would say, how are you managing a knee replacement for Seth? You know, we'll give you an expected spend for 3 days before having his knee replaced, the time that he's in the hospital, and then a set amount of time afterwards, 30, 60, 90 days. How are you doing compared to what we expect, and give you the score for that. So there are some measures that tie back to specialists and are more relevant to kind of how they operate within the continuum. The MVP track as well provides some specialty specific measure sets that will be more, again, conducive to you know, what you as a specialist do on a day-to-day basis, but it's still going to be very challenging. And again, that's another reason we don't mean to belabor the ACO route, but what we've seen is that it gives you the most advantageous approach. It pulls cost out. It allows you to report as a group, so you can bring a wide breadth of different provider types into an ACO model, not have to be in risk for at least 5 years, and use that as the vehicle to be successful under MIPS, and still being in MIPS and allow yourself the potential for a higher upside than you may get moving into the advanced APM model. So it's certainly a strategy that we're seeing a lot of groups evaluate for not only primary care, but also a primary care specialist mix approach.
So obviously too, when you say ACO, it could also be EQIP. One more question. If you have if you're an EQIP entity, let's say you have an EQIP entity with 10 practices, do all the practices have to do the same thing, or can 3 take the AAPM bonus, 3 do MIPS APM, and 1 do MIPS, or isn't it a practitioner by practitioner choice?
I don't believe so. I believe it's all together in one, similar to other group reported types of measures. So it's APM entity level reported measure set. So you select one path and you all go together using that path. There are some deviation underneath it. So for example, in the most recently finalized fee schedule rule, as a group, you can report for an ACO. So now everyone has to report promoting interoperability. Underneath that, you can either report it at the individual group or APM level, but you all have to have the same overarching reporting area. You can't be some in MIPS and some in a advanced APM or something like that.
Which is another reason why when you're setting up your EQIP groups, you might want to split them based on what you want to do on this strategy. Now, it's too late to do that for this year, but it'll be definitely a consideration for next year. We have one more question from Elizabeth. When reporting as a group, would all eligible providers receive the adjustment, or only those with your ACO contract?
Great question. So it depends when you say as a group. We're getting very weedy here. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to. I know how horrible policy is, particularly early in the morning. Yeah, under the 10. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. That's a great clarification. So if you're in an ACO, a Medicare ACO, participation is determined at the 10 level. So everyone within the 10 would be a part of the MSSP ACO. There is another ACO model. Again, I'm trying not to get too weedy here. That's called the ACO Reach program that has participation at what they call the 10 NPI level. So you're able to take a subset of providers from the 10 and participate. That program is closed currently to new applicants, but you could join another currently operating Reach ACO and have the subset, and within that you would have the eligibility or the adjustment tied at the NPI level for a 10 NPI participation. But for the other models that are solely at the 10 level, everyone within the group would receive the adjustment. Sorry, that is very weedy. I feel good saying it.
And I will say this: Will Henderson just texted me. We're going to have the HSCRC talk to CMMI and get clarity on both the question I just asked and the last one, just to make sure that EQIP isn't treated differently from the ACOs for some reason by CMMI. Logically, we would think it'd be the same, but that's an important question, and we'll get that. We'll ask them directly and see what we find out. But your answer obviously makes sense for the ACOs. All right, you want to put your contact info up, and are there any other questions before we move on to Jessica? You want to switch forward to your contact for a few seconds just so people can get it and send you emails and touch base.
There it is.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you coming on this morning, and this was terrific and very helpful. This is one of the most complicated things that I think they've put together for us as practitioners. It used to be you just had to take care of people and you got paid. Now it's really complicated, you know. Maybe one day we'll get back to taking care of people and getting paid, but I don't know when that will be. After the revolution, I guess. All right. So Jessica, you want to go ahead and take over and start the updates and go from there?
Yes, sure. Thank you guys. And Brian and Seth, thank you so much for your presentation. I think definitely was right on point and hopefully answered some questions. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, so we are going to pivot and move right into sort of updates for the rest of this calendar year, specifically for PY3, and then talk about what PY4 looks like. So PY3, just giving sort of an update on the overall participation and numbers. So as of November 1st, we had just over 4,500 care partners. Again, that's a big jump, about a 30% jump from last year. We still have representation from many different specialties and have almost doubled the number of EQIP entities. So there's 129 EQIP entities. There were about 60 so last year. And again, these numbers, as every single time we come and report them, are slightly going to change. Essentially, the final numbers will be determined at the start of the year when we can get through vetting and, of course, the contracting process. And essentially, that's where we are when we talk about this enrollment process. So we're in the really, hopefully, getting towards the finish line in this late fall, early winter section, and focusing on the care partner arrangements, the contracting, and we hope to have the final vetting list from CMS back next week or maybe the week after, which will really help define all of the eligible participants in each EQIP entities. So just as a reminder for our care partner arrangement process, this year we are requiring that every care partner sign a new agreement, even if they're participating in years 1 or year 2. You know, some lessons learned when it came to payments in year 1, where that we needed to add some language, have more flexibility when it came to like the address and things like that for payments. We did add some of that important language in there, which is why the requirement is to re-sign. So again, we really thank our partners at for assisting in this process. They actually sent out an email to each EQIP entity at the beginning of last week. So some of them may have gotten it later last week, but essentially every entity got a unique link, which they have access to a SharePoint folder in which care partner arrangements for all of their practitioners are pre-populated. Again, it's a standardized agreement, but there is some information specific to that entity and that individual. So those are pre-populated and available for you in that folder. We do rely and lean on the lead care partners, or really the administrative proxies, to you know, herd the cats, disseminate that information and collect it back with those signatures. Has asked that the signatures be sent directly to their inbox at equip@umm.edu, and they are requesting the full contract, not just the signature page, since there are some additional information that's very pertinent on the earlier side of that contract. However, electronic signatures are accepted, so please utilize that if that helps streamline the process. And we are looking at December 15th as the deadline. So, you know, last year we learned that it took quite some time to reconcile at the end of the year, especially during the holidays, which sort of delayed the availability of baseline data for PY2. So again, lessons learned, we're trying to get this pretty much squared away to enable us to sort of have this fresh, really cohesive start in the beginning of next year. So please keep that in mind. Communication status, I think there's a lot of questions when people say, oh, did I send this in, or who's eligible, things like that. I do want to point out that the lead care partners and administrative proxies do have access to view the status of their care partners in the EQIP entity portal. So if you go in, you can looks like your care partner dashboard. And essentially in here, you'll be able to see the status at the individual MPI level of both their CMS vetting as well as the care partner arrangements. The care partner arrangements will update about weekly, so please give us time. We may get batches, or really gets batches and batches at a time, so you may not see that column be updated, maybe 2-3 business days afterwards. So please don't fret if that's the case, especially as we get closer to that December 15th deadline. I'm assuming we'll get a bunch at once, but we will update that. And then Chris will also be sending an email weekly just to give you a sense of your total percentage of completion. So we'll let you know, hey, 50% of your care partners have signed, and then you can go into this portal and see specifically which ones. Again, if you just sent one the day or two prior, that may not be captured in that number, but at least it'll give you sort of a sense of where you're doing as far as getting this all completed by December 15th. So when we talk about sort of the finalization process, so with that, there is two sort of additional steps when it comes to final eligibility and sort of probationary status. So we talked last time about the timing and communication for care partners that are currently participating in PY2, but they were on a probationary status. And what that meant is, they're active for PY2, but they did not have a claim in the baseline period. And they also didn't have a claim in PY1. So this is, essentially brand new. They're enabled to participate. However, we will determine their eligibility for PY3 based off of the first 2 quarters of data. And that'll be available towards sort of mid-end of December. And essentially, if they did not touch a claim in the first half of the performance year, of this current performance year, they will finish up and still be enrolled in the calendar 2023 performance year, but they will no longer be eligible to participate in next calendar year, or PY3. And we will, we'll communicate this. We will drop the providers from your list. It's sort of informational, but of course want to ensure that everyone is on the same page. And do want to note, while they will be removed for PY3, they are eligible to re-enroll for PY4, especially if there are new episodes that may better align and that they are actively participating. In. Again, communication probably mid-late January for that. Additionally, once we get all of the care partner arrangements, vetting, the PY2 probationary people off of the list, essentially we have the final composite of the NPIs within an entity, and another round of sort of analytics are done on the back end. And what we do is we look at the volume thresholds, claim thresholds, and your quality metrics. So there have been some instances that based off of the composite of that final NPI list, your entity could fall below volume thresholds, and essentially you're no longer eligible to participate in like 1 or 2 of the episodes. You would continue to be eligible for the program, and other episodes that you meet those volume thresholds, again, you're participating in for PY3, but we would drop those below that volume, typically below 11 for that episode. Again, the claim threshold, so this is similar to the probation that we just talked about, but looking at that final composite, we will let you know if at least 75% of the care partners in your entity have touched a claim in baseline, and make edits if needed, as well as inform you if there are NPIs that will be considered on probation for PY3. Again, they're able to participate. There's, they'll actively be in the episode, but we'll look at their eligibility for PY4 based off of the first half of claims in PY3. And finally, quality metrics. So we will look at the minimum quality performance during baseline, and we will communicate to entities if they're considered on probation based off of that time frame. Those entities that were on probation for prior years but moved off of it will no longer be on probation. Again, all of that will be communicated, but it is based off of the final composite. So we won't be able to sort of know all of this until probably very early in January, when everything sort of has been squared away. So that's for PY3 contracting. I actually did not have a slide about CERT, but I do want to make sure, since that question was asked, that we mention it here. So one of the requirements for participating in EQIP, it's been since, the first year, and really for any episode, it does require for care partners to be using a certified electronic health record. This really hasn't been a non-issue, especially given the types of episodes that we had in year 1 and year 2. However, in year 3, what we've really been proud of is there's a growth in different types of clinicians and specialties that are participating. But specifically, some of our physical therapy practices have not traditionally been using a certified electronic health record because there wasn't necessarily a requirement previously. So HSCRC had been working with CMS over many months to try to determine what's the best path forward. Could there be an exception or things like that? Having the cert is a requirement. There is no leniency on that. However, we're trying to still determine, can we align the application process for an exemption from cert, which CMS does have, with the timing of the EQIP enrollment and participation. So as of right now, those that do not have cert or do not have a certified electronic health record, and some have already reached out about, if they are able to participate, and we will communicate if we can, like I said, recommend an exemption, that what the exemption application would be, as well as how it would apply. It may be able to still get them in for this year, or it may not. And that's sort of the question that we have on CMS's, that we're working with CMS to see, can this exemption be done? Again, can it be applied to 2023, or is it something that they apply, but it only would be applicable after they've received that, after they've been granted, the exemption, which would really be in calendar year 2024. So that's sort of what we're working with. Again, previously that, we haven't had an issue, but we do want to continue to be mindful of this. And again, one of our pillars is allowing, or hopefully promoting, participation across many different types of clinicians and specialties. So it is something we're continuing to work with as we're sort of growing.
So I guess the what we would recommend is, if you're a physical therapy group that does not have a certified EHR, you should probably move forward and send in your agreement and do everything you need to do while we try to get an answer and see if you can move forward with the exemption and go from there. So and we'll see if we can work that out. If they say no, they say no, and we'll have to wait till the following year. But I would not meet all the other requirements as we're going forward until we know for sure what CMMI is going to say.
Yes, and I did get a question about Cindy enrolling our EQIP practices and dropping episodes. So Cindy, if you can email me directly offline, we can see if we can figure that out. Just from clarity, during enrollment, it's the goal to have essentially the composite and the participation of your EQIP entities, essentially how you'd like it to look during the participation period. So that's when you add drop NPIs, you add drop episodes, things like that. But please email me directly and we can chat. Okay. I will pause here and ask if there are any additional questions about PY3, any other additional steps that sort of need to happen between now and the start of the performance year on January 1st, because they're about to pivot to PY4.
Jessica, I just wanted to bring up something that we've experienced at Shore. We have hired 10 new hospitalist providers this year who are not eligible to be enrolled because they don't have any baseline data in our 2019 year. Is this something that's ever going to be looked at? We're a very small rural hospital. Provider recruitment and retention is a big thing for us. We would like to be able to participate and have our new providers in this program. They have signed contracts for 3 years. So I'm a little disappointed that, we're above our, 75 or below our 75% care partners enrolled for the 2019 year. It's just a little frustrating.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a point, a great question and a good point that has been brought up by other people. Just essentially, as we move further and further away from the 2019 baseline, that problem, I guess, kind of amplifies and grows. For the first 3 performance years, when we started this program, we determined that 2019 would be sort of the baseline. I know the HSCRC, and William, feel free to jump in if I misspeak, but the HSCRC is essentially trying to determine what is the best way to answer that question. Is it a sort of a blended model, but to essentially enable new clinicians to join while also not, or I said, maybe say they're questioning whether they should completely rebase, because it also that disadvantages practices that joined early and sort of made improvements within the first couple years. And we don't want sort of this race to the bottom type of mentality if we rebase year over year. So you bring up a very good question. I think it's on the table as far as trying to determine what's the best path forward when we're looking at PY4. So that would be, again, the calendar year 2025. But certainly something that is part of the conversation, because a fair point and definitely feedback that we've heard.
I'm going to make two suggestions on this point. One is, can we simply lower the threshold? Because that would help. And I think that's reasonable, or maybe have folks who are new practitioners with a certain period not count towards the threshold. And then the second comment I'd make, Jessica, is the MedChi EQIP entities had very few people who didn't touch an episode. So maybe next year, if we haven't fixed it, we can talk about just sticking those 10 in one of ours, which if we can do it without messing up threshold, I'm willing to do that. It doesn't matter to me, and that would get them in for you possibly. So we can talk about that.
Thank you.
From a practical point of view, but that's not a good solution, because obviously if everybody who had this problem just stuck them in ours, we would have this problem too. And I'm not, but still, then that's a way of getting you in, allowing you participate from a practical point of view. So we can have that discussion next summer. But maybe we can consider one of those two policy changes and see if CMMI will allow that.
Yes, thank you. And there was another question in the chat, and again, a question sort of about that early, I want to say maybe 2 weeks ago now at this point, CMS came out with a final rule for different procedures as far as approving them or taking them off the inpatient only list. Shoulder replacements was one of those. So we have allowed or are allowing entities to elect to participate in shoulder replacements. We do need to know soon. So I think we said Wednesday of next week. We cannot add any NPIs at this point, but essentially we're saying, hey, look, the same group that I want, but I want to add this episode that, strategically we decided not to participate in because, of the restrictions from CMS. And now, given, the ruling that just came out, it makes sense for us to participate. This is a great opportunity. So please email us and we will get that straightened away. Any changes now have to be completed on the back end. So, if you go in, you actually won't have the ability to be able to do that. So again, just please email me and we're happy to do that. And I think some, great strategy and conversation when it comes to looking at sort of external impacts to how, participation in this program. I think it's all I see in the chat, but feel free to pop in whenever. Okay, so looking at PY4, so that's calendar year 2025. Again, crazy that it seems that far off and we're already talking about it, but essentially we're already starting to kind of look at a tight timeline. So as a reminder, for performance year 4 episode development process, really we need to know by sort of the end of this calendar year if there's interest from stakeholders about a customized episode. Everything obviously doesn't need to be worked out by then, but we need to get a sense of, okay, there's a large, specialty that is seeing that they want to add an episode that's not available, or maybe they're not represented in the episodes that we have available right now. We want to gauge some interest in that. We'll say behavioral health has been something that has been brought up and is something that was certainly on the table at looking at what an episode could look like. And then when we move into the earlier part of the next calendar year, that's essentially when we work very closely with our clinical experts or those stakeholders to model out what that episode would be, and then look to CMMI for approval of that episode, and then roll that out from a recruitment type of standpoint into July. Again, that's sort of why this timeline kind of seems compressed and crazy, that we sort of already need to be having conversations about that. But if there is interest, we ask, of course, please reach out to the EQIP inbox, which will get you in touch with HSCRC, and thinking about what would an episode look like, what would be sort of the triggering procedures. We'll work on the details with that, but that's essentially what the ask is when partnering with the clinical experts. Bandwidth of this does sort of matter. So again, if there is a high interest and based off of who gets, who reaches out to us first, it is something that we need to consider. So please let us know. And I'll just like to add, plugging last year, it really was a wonderful partnership that we had with Dr. Mark Renner with the MSK episode to have that come to fruition this year. So it's a perfect example of how that partnership sort of worked. Okay, so more PY4 conversations. The biggest thing here is that the Prometheus contract ends in December of 2024. So essentially, what to do next? Some things that we want to bring to the table, to the stakeholder group, of course, are considerations when it comes to Prometheus. We're currently in the second year of using it and obviously committed to using it for next year as well, but certainly some time to sort of pause and think. So as you guys know, Prometheus is, it's been in iteration or development since 2006. It is right now, it's owned by Change Healthcare. Optum owns the methodology. It is, the foundation of it is coordination and collaboration across the continuum and really looking at sort of specialist level of care. Additionally, there are 97 episodes, different type of procedures or category types that are already sort of off the shelf available to use. We currently have 33 episodes in Prometheus episodes in PY3 for this year. And it also is in alignment with Care First episode program, which some of the groups in EQIP also participate in. And again, the goal there was to reduce the administrative burden. So those are sort of some great things, and also sort of the foundation of the selection of Prometheus from the start of this program. Other things to consider is, because it is proprietary information owned by Optum or Change Healthcare, the detail of that grouper is a little bit of a black box when it comes to methodology. So there have been times that our participants are asking us really good detailed questions, and there's really only so much that the state can answer because it all sort of lives within that proprietary methodology. Additionally, that episode development really has stalled. So that 97 has sort of been 97 episodes for the last couple of years now. And what that has meant is new episodes outside of that, or new specialties, it relies on the HSCRC to create the customized episodes. Again, a little bit more time and effort, and also it limits the bandwidth on how many can be added each year. Finally, a little bit due to the contracting with Prometheus, we are limited to quarterly data runs. So you guys get snapshots every quarter. It does create a delay in sort of your claims data. Again, claims data by definition is going to be delayed, but you add, only 4 runs a year, you're sort of amplifying some of the delay there. And finally, Care First is also considering what they're doing. So they may stay on Prometheus or they may not. It's something that is certainly something that they're considering. So sort of that alignment may be true or maybe not. So with that said, if Prometheus does not make sense to move forward, what does? So we want to introduce another grouper that has sort of been brought to the table. It's called the Patient-Centered Episode of Care System, or PACES, another lovely acronym. And PACES is it's an independently operated organization, and it sort of has a community model. It's governed by a non-for-profit board of directors comprised of healthcare experts, and really it is committed to transparency as their foundation, and to have readily accessible, business rules, as well as methodology sets that are available for the public. So essentially, there's no black box. Again, they are really founded on developing clinically sound episodes. So they have a clinical community and stakeholders that assist with sort of both growing more episodes, but also ensuring that episodes are kept to date, as things change. And they really are wanting to define themselves not as a software organization, but really developing the definitions associated with the grouper. So what that means is they're not going to run the data. They're not saying we're selling the intelligence, but also our specific software can only run it or things like that. They're focused on creating these definitions, and really with potentially licensing with them, there's opportunity for us as stakeholders to run the software and thus actually increase the availability of the data runs. So PACE's episodes of care. So they currently have over 1,000 episodes, and they kind of group them into different types of episodes: procedure, chronic condition, and acute condition episodes. But of those 1,000, they're in sort of various phases of refinement. So they have 20 finalized, fully deployable episodes. Those are ones, again, could be implemented tomorrow if need be. And then they have another 100 that are sort of in the queue to be finalized within the next 12 months. These are ones that are pretty much defined, but they're looking, essentially to clinical experts to vet it, to review the codes, and ensure that they feel confident with the definition that's provided from them. All of the episodes, all the thousands of them, are grouped into 15 clinical chapters based off of their clinical domain. And just as an FYI, the 33 Prometheus episodes that we have for UI3 do align with one of the 90 finalized deployable PACES episodes. So that is good news if we're looking sort of at a mapping, high level alignment. What I want to emphasize is that they do convene these clinical panels in order to review the detailed codes. So if there are clinical experts that are interested in, especially looking at sort of those 100 in the queue that are willing to spend a couple hours, that is something that we can easily work and partner with them to get those episodes over the finish line and make them currently deployable. As I mentioned before, because PACES is strictly looking at the methodology of its episodes, all of the infrastructure of running and modeling out them is done by whoever licensed with them. So what that does, it enables CRISP HSCRC to look at the performance data release, and essentially, could we put this on this similar schedule like we do with many of our other programs and have monthly releases of this? Again, want to caveat, it is claimed, so it'll always be somewhat delayed, but it's definitely a huge positive as we potentially look at a different grouper. I will pause here if there's questions sort of about PACES. Okay. I'm not going to review this, but these are the 90 fully vetted clinical episodes. You guys can see this when you see the when you get the slides. Timing of this decision. So we're bringing this to you all, especially since we have sort of this contracting decision that expires at the end of next year. Really between now and the next subgroup meeting in January, so essentially in December, CRISP HSCRC is looking at the detailed analytical grouper comparison. So as you mentioned, the 33 episodes maps to a fully deployable PACES one, but what does that mean in detail? It's a different grouper, so we do expect some variation, but we want to explore to what extent that variation is. Some of it could be, I'll just give an example, they may have an episode that is, or Prometheus has an episode that may be larger, like, a hip and pelvic fracture, whereas PACES has 2 separate episodes for that. So again, wanting to look at what the detailed impact of that, model that out so we can really see when we say, if we moved PACES, what would this mean for me as an individual participant? We're going to bring sort of that recommendation and high-level analytics to the January meeting here. And then between January and March, we will be hosting really specific informational meetings at the specialty level, which will kind of go through that detailed review of the episodes. And the hope there is, again, we expect variation, but that may be different between each group. So wanting to allow that time and concentration to be able to answer it when it comes to the different subspecialties. In March, essentially, that's when the decision needs to fully be made. So we will know what grouper we're using. I think there's also opportunity to look at what specific episodes are being deployable there too, especially if there's some that may be beyond, the 33 that map to the Prometheus ones. And all of that needs to be done because essentially in July is when we open enrollment for next year. So sort of a compressed timeline, 4 months-ish time to be able to do all of that. Our goal here is really, again, to bring this to you all. When you get these slides, please, if you're interested, please take a look at what the PACES grouper information looks like online. It has a wealth of information. It is not behind a paywall, so you can really see some of the information there. Questions, concerns, please bring that to the EQIP inbox, and we'll continue to provide feedback and do due diligence as we work through these next 3 months, 4 months. Okay. I'm surprised there were questions there, but I guess that's a good thing. You guys can digest that. And that's all that we had as far as planned content for today. Just as a reminder, our next meeting is scheduled for January, the 3rd Friday of the month. And we will post and have a recording of these slides available both on MedKai's and CRISP's website.
I just want to reiterate 2 things that are really important. One is, if there's a desire to add a bundle of some kind, you've got to tell us now. We're working on a renal episode. We're working on a primary care episode. And Jessica and I got a pretty clear message at the HSCRC meeting when we presented in October that we're going to be doing a behavioral health episode. So we already have 3, which is a lot. And we're also obviously about ready to make a decision on whether we continue with Prometheus or maybe switch to another grouper. So if you have input on that, it's really important that you give us that. If we don't get any input, we'll make the decision without it. Right.
And we have one last question in the chat. 2 questions. Okay, so one question was that the APM bonus to EQIP entities. How is it paid out? Just as I think there was a little bit of this in Premier's presentation, but the timing of that payment is completely different than the EQIP shared savings. So there's a 2-year lag on that. If you are participating in calendar year 2023 this year, that's the performance year. Next year is the measurement year, and you receive payment in the following year. So participating in 2023, payment would be received in 2025. So 2-year lag, and again, that would follow on.
And that's the same schedule for all APM entities.
Yes.
So all fee-for-service payments are exactly the same in EQIP. They go directly to you. The advance payment is managed on that schedule. And then do you want to give them the shared savings bonus payment schedule if that applies to, just so everyone understands how the money flows, Jessica?
Yeah, so the shared savings one is done, like to say, in Q4 of the prior year. So essentially checks for performance year 1 just went out. So that gives you a sense of timing. Again, it's our first year. We do hope maybe that's moved up a little bit next year, but we're learning with y'all. So you would see the shared savings as a separate lump sum payment to the payment remission source that was entered in enrollment, that's put on the contracts, and matches the W-9 that you guys submitted. Make sure all the ducks are in a row. But you'll see that, like I said, 9 to 12 months after the close of the performance year. It's a completely separate payment than obviously your normal fee for service and the APM. Just to close out that question, the APM is at, or the bonus there, again, we mentioned that it's provisioned at the individual NPI level. So those practitioners in your group that are participating in EQIP, those are the ones that would be eligible for the APM bonus. So again, it's not at the TIN level. It is looking at the vetting and eligibility at the individual NPI level. And it is based off of your Part B Medicare payments. And finally, the quality metrics, there was a question about for PT, but just as a reminder, the quality metrics for EQIP are the same 3 quality metrics across the board, independent of your specialty or the episodes that you're participating in. So those are have been the same 3 for years 1, 2, and 3. Just as a reminder, it's the advanced care planning, BMI screening, and reconciliation of medications. So all of that, there is no reporting requirements by the entities since we derive your compliance with those episodes based off of claims. Again, all based off of claims. That is available in the portal. And if there is additional information, we can send you resources. We use the same methodology that CMS uses for those MIPS measures as well. And just sort of some, I'm seeing a couple questions about episodes. So any endocrinology episodes, I'm assuming that has to do with PACEs. So there are some in that. And again, if there is specific interest, Daniel, I can send you sort of the endocrine ones, especially looking at maybe the ones that are in the queue. If there is a specialist that is one or two specialists that are willing to work on that, again, we can push that over the finish line. And then Dr. Modermass also mentioned, management of diabetes. So would be a good episode. And what would the primary care episode possibly look like? That's a good question. William, do you want to talk a little bit about that, the primary care EQIP one?
We will be releasing an RFI to get input from stakeholders on that, hopefully in the next 3 weeks. I think my preference is to wait and let that come out, and that will sort of have a vetted description of the program within it. And then maybe on the January call, we can set a little bit of time aside to go over that in more detail.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea, Will. I just also wanted to say that the PACES bundle, unlike Prometheus, you can actually look at it. So I would really urge those of you who are interested in new models to look at what they've got up on the website. The links I think Jessica had in her presentation. So when I send the thing out, it'll remind you, and please look at it. Oh, there you go.
Yep, it's right there. And you can see the actual detail. You can download the details of the episode there. So it's sort of great. I'm seeing just one more question from Kevin about enrolling PT providers who saw Medicare patients in 2019, but they use hospital billing, and if that had been an issue with other groups. So I will say, just from the enrollment side, Chris had seen that sort of billing practices did impact eligibility, since essentially the attribution of episodes and things like that has to do with the rendering NPI. So that does need to be people that bill Medicare Part B. So depending on how your billing practices, specifically with PT, that could impact individual and group eligibility.
So we have two more questions here. I wanted to call on Dr. I'm going to say your name wrong. I'm sorry, Marachani, I guess. And he has got something I really wanted to make sure we shared with the group. He works with a company called MIDEO, which is helping folks achieve the end-of-life quality measure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that really quickly for the good of the order?
Sure. And if I could just show just one graphic, if you don't mind. And
go right ahead.
Share their screen, and that way everybody can at least put a face to a name of it. So
right. And then Melanie, I'll have you go right after that. He's going to show one graphic. There you go.
Yep. That's all. So I'm Fred Merarkey. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I'm the CEO of USACS MIDEO, as well as MIDEO Health. And what we did is created a medical program, essentially to do a medical grade advanced care planning, and essentially to really put some degree of teeth behind people's advanced care planning wishes, as far as advanced directives or post orders, most orders, and so on. But we took it a step further, and we actually built technology to allow what's called patient to clinician video, which is probably the most accurate way to really ensure we're getting a wish done correctly for a patient. So we create video-based advanced directives, video-based medical orders. And the unique thing about us is we utilize the patient or the patient's healthcare agent in this video to direct clinical teams as far as what to do when, to make sure that we provide the right level of care. There's two graphics you see there. One is the top of a card. One is the back of an ID card. The ID cards are set up with Joint Commission identifiers. They're set up with information about code status, organ donation, if patients have a document, who to contact in an emergency, and if they have an order. The first QR code that you see on top is actually a QR code of what a MIDEO looks like. The second QR code on the bottom, which is the back of the card, actually is the document or medical order that a patient has. And I'm just going to show you quickly what a video looks like, a MIDEO looks like, and that way I can get out of everybody's hair.
Hello, I'm Mike Gallagher, test, and this is my informed decision on video. My emergency treatment choice is no CPR, DNR, and allow my natural death. Please do not transfer me to an emergency room unless it is to control pain. My date of birth is November 3, 2022. And this message has been validated by the Institute on Healthcare Directives. My mind is sound as I voluntarily record this video safety statement. If you are reviewing this message, then the time has come to withhold or withdraw all treatment that attempts to prolong my life. My goal of care at this time are to attain a dignified, comfortable, and peaceful natural death. Please do not follow your emergency treatment protocols such as ATLS, ACLS, sepsis, or stroke resuscitation. However, you do have my permission to consult palliative care or hospice. If there is a change in my condition or you require further direction, assurance, or clarification of my goals, then please contact my healthcare agent, who is my son, Sean Gallagher, at 814-555-5555. To all, thank you for help in these difficult times.
So I don't want you to bury the lead. There's no cost to the referring provider, and they will bill the modifier at a minimum, but possibly the entire end of life thing on the Medio side, and that's how they make money. So this is not an endorsement or anything, but I just think that was one of the quality measures that we've run into trouble on, and this could be a possible solution. So did you want to say anything else about that, or any clarification?
Sure, absolutely. So we want to make this a solution for all. And we're doing a lot of work in the state of Maryland, mostly because it's the most progressive as far as video, in addition to the most progressive in trying to get documents on different forms of communication tools like driver's licenses and so on. So our goal is to build a nationwide practice around this and essentially make it so that the revenue cycle is done through the insurance entity and that people don't have to go spend tons of money dealing with attorneys or other types of documents that exist. And in addition to that, we actually do verify what people have or create. So if people have most orders or post orders that are discordant, we evaluate that, we fix it, we upload something that's more current and more concordant with what the patient's wishes actually are. And these are conversations with physicians rather than just other ancillary personnel. I don't want to take anything away from ancillary personnel, but the levels of discordance out there are suggesting that we really need to do better at this. And there's no better communications that can happen between a patient than with their doctor or their advanced practice provider who's going to be taking care of them.
So why don't you put your contact in the chat so people have, if they want to reach out to you directly. But again, this does not constitute an endorsement. It's just an opportunity to solve that quality measure problem if it's something you're struggling with. And again, there's no they make their money by billing the codes and managing the service. So there's no cost to the referring provider. And like I said, we had several practices have trouble with that quality measure. And Melanie, do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, thank you, Gene. And I'm just going to take a couple minutes. I just want to remind everyone about the practice transformation program that we have available with the coaches from the MedChi CTO. We heard a lot about MIPS today. And the materials that this program is built on were actually designed by CMMI to support MIPS when it was first rolled out. So what we've layered on top of that is customized coaching and workflows to help support practices. So if practices are struggling with MIPS measure, this is a great program for them to be able to get some support. And since MHCC has a grant to you, we pay for that support to help those practices out. So we've had a lot of practices who've given us great feedback about things they've been able to do. And I just want to let everybody be aware of that. We do have a couple of the EQIP practices in it, and we have several that are interested. We do have a few spots left, so reach out to Gene or I if people would like some help in these areas.
All right, that was like a really solid packed meeting with everything. Is there anything else anybody wants to share? All right. Are we done, Jessica?
Yeah, that was great. So
all right.
appreciate
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
time.
Thanksgiving, everyone. And I'll get the recording up in short order. So you can share it with your friends on Thanksgiving. See ya.
Thank you. Good meeting.